Hi, and welcome to Trusted Voices. I'm Bobby Halton. I work for Penwell Fire Engineering and FDIC. And we're going to visit today with my old friend Chief Alan Brunancini, and who's arguably probably one of the most eloquent and influential voices in the modern fire service. Chief started his career back in 1953.
58.
Right? 58.
58.
Sorry, didn't mean to date you. In 1958. Since then has participated in probably every Sentinel event. It was one of the originals when it comes to the creation of a lot of the things we take for granted in the fire service today, whether it's customer service or incident command, and we'll talk about those things. But we'd like to start off, and I would like to start off by giving the younger folks maybe a chance to hear about who you are, where you came from, and what drew you to the fire service as a young man, and just a little bit of your background. I mean, arguably anybody in my generation knows exactly who you are. I mean, you couldn't swing a dead cat without having to read a Brunancini book to get promoted, or or understand a concept that you were putting forward throughout my entire career. But for some of our younger folks that are just coming on,
Yeah.
where you came from and what drew you to this crazy profession?
I was born in New York. When I was very young, we moved to Albuquerque, where you and I lived together. You lived in the same city for years. And I went through school there. When I graduated from high school, I moved to Phoenix. Went to college for probably 3 years before I got on the fire department. In those days, you had to be 21 to get on the fire department. So I joined the fire department in 1958. And I have lived here basically the rest of my life. And spent 48 years on the Phoenix Fire Department, and basically served in every position. Went through the system. And Phoenix was kind of an interesting city because it was the fastest growing metro city in the United States, probably in North America, maybe anywhere, I don't know. But it was a very, very rapidly growing system. When I joined the fire department, we had 9 fire stations, and I retired in 2006, and we had almost probably 65 fire stations. So in one career, we really built the fire department. That was the period where we did a lot of the program development in the fire service. So I was really fortunate because I was involved in that, and they were kind of new programs, which are fun because you're expanding and you're using people to do kind of new, different, better kinds of things. And it was a really interesting place to work. And Phoenix is kind of a special city because it's the largest city probably anywhere that's still managed by a strong city manager form of government. Most of them have a strong mayor, metro cities. And that's been the culture here in the history, and there's a lot of attachment to the city manager kind of an idea of government in the process. So it has had kind of historically a division between the administrative side, which is the city manager, and the policy side, which is the city council and the mayor. And they get along very well. In other words, it's a very cooperative kind of a system, but it's very professional. And I think, I was the fire chief for 28 years, and I worked directly for the city manager. And, there's a lot of metro cities where you serve at the pleasure of the mayor, and then that changes. You and I have talked about that through the years.
Yeah.
So I was fortunate because I was in a place where I started, and then I stayed there, and I got again to work in every level in the system. So that was really a good preparation and kind of orientation, because I knew what was kind of going on in that part of the system. And then I got to be a fire chief for probably longer than most people do. So we did probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 cycles of cultural change in the process. So it was really an interesting place to be. And
So it's 1957, 56. You'd been interested in being a firefighter for a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, we always laugh. There's a great cartoon by our mutual friend where he has you as a little boy pulling a wagon, and it's a fire truck wagon.
Pony, yeah.
Yeah, Pony. Wonderful illustrators, done fire command and anatomy and physiology and
doing blue card now.
Doing blue card now. Yeah. So always, since you were a toddler?
When I was, and I can still remember that when I was 4 years old, and I was riding in a car in Jamestown, New York with my mother, and we were parked, just she and I in the car, and in those days I was standing up on the seat like kids did in those days. And we stopped at the top of a hill, and we heard this commotion, and it was a fire engine. and it actually caught the hydrant in front of where we were parked, and we could look down the hill. It was in a place where you could kind of see ahead of you, and there was a tire store that was burning. So they laid a line so we couldn't move because the supply line was in front of us. And I stood on the seat and I watched this whole fire event there. We probably were there maybe 20 minutes, the front end of the fire thing. This was the most dramatic, the best part of it, yeah. And it fried my brain, so, and I always laugh about it. I was, occupationally, I was pretty restless, aimless until then. After that, I never wanted to do anything or be anything besides that in the process. So I was really lucky because I got to do that. And again, I can still see that, the process. And I've gone back to Jamestown. I taught a series of seminars in New York State for the chiefs there. And there was some guys in the fire department that remembered that fire.
Wow.
Yeah, and they said that it was in a place where there would have been a hill. I mean, they were old timers then, right, obviously, right. And they said, yeah, that was a XYZ tire store or company or whatever it was. So it was kind of interesting to make that connection.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah.
That's really neat. Yeah. Those smaller communities, those jobs are legendary.
Yeah. And it was a significant fire.
I mean, tire store fires were a big deal.
And it was.
They didn't have foam back then or access to sand trucks.
And it ended up being a master stream kind of water festival.
You have to float them.
And I think that was probably, for a little kid like that, was pretty impressive when you saw that fire stream activity and companies arriving and all of it. And it was the period when fire trucks were pretty, like this truck, they're pretty dramatic looking vehicles, So again, for a little kid, it was very impressive, I guess, Yeah. So that was kind of the beginning of it.
That's what got you hooked.
That's right. Yeah. No, it's an interesting experience too. Yeah. And then in Albuquerque, I kind of chased the Albuquerque Fire Department a bit when I was going to high school. They had a fire chief who was a really interesting guy. Art Westerfield, do you remember?
Yeah, legendary.
He was a classic guy. He had a Buick convertible. Had a driver, big Native American guy, and they were. You were a member of that fire department. They were very substantial. Very traditional fire department.
Absolutely.
So that was kind of the impression that I was raised with, because I watched them and kind of hung out with them. And I lived up in the northeast part of Albuquerque there, and there were 2 or 3 fire stations that were around us. And it was again, I think it still is a very substantial, very effective fire department. So I kind of had that impression too in the process.
Absolutely. Yeah. Two great organizations, Jamestown, New York, and Albuquerque, New Mexico.
That's right, yeah.
And they spawned what would later be the Phoenix experiment.
It's kind of interesting. When I was in high school, a friend of mine moved to Phoenix, and when we lived in Albuquerque, and I never liked cold weather. And Albuquerque is an interesting place because it's a mile high, and you live there most of your life. And so they have all 4 seasons all at once.
In one day.
In one day, yeah.
That's right. You can wake up and it's freezing in the morning and be swimming in,
that's right.
in a lake.